I never thought I'd become one of those women. You know the kind. Bright, ambitious, full of dreams, only to end up trapped in a life they never saw coming. But I did. And for the longest time, I didn't even realize it, Dot. When I met Richard, I was thriving. At 28, I had a rising career in marketing, a well-paying job, and a promising future. I worked hard, earned my own money, and felt proud of my independence. Then Richard came along, charming, confident, successful. He owned a small but profitable consulting firm, and from the moment we met, he made me feel like the most special woman in the world. He wooed me with extravagant dates, whispered promises of a beautiful future, and always made me feel like I was his top priority. It was intoxicating. So when he suggested that I quit my job and focus on building a family together, it didn't seem like such a bad idea. He reasoned that his income was more than enough to support us, and honestly, the idea of stepping away from the constant grind of corporate life seemed tempting. "Why stress yourself out when I can take care of everything?" he'd say with that easy, confident smile of his. "You deserve to enjoy life." I hesitated at first, but he was persistent. He made it sound so logical, so caring. "You can always go back to work later," he reassured me. "Besides, I want to take care of you." And so, against my better judgment, I handed in my resignation, telling myself it was just a temporary break. At first it was nice. I had free time, I decorated our apartment, I planned our vacations. But soon I noticed little changes. Richard, who once encouraged me to splurge on myself, started questioning my spending. "Do you really need another pair of shoes?" "Why did you order takeout when we have groceries?" It was subtle at first, disguised as concern, but then he stopped giving me access to our joint account. Instead, he gave me a set amount of cash each week, just enough for household expenses, with barely anything left over for myself. It's just easier this way," he explained when I asked. "I handle the finances so you don't have to worry." I told myself he meant well, that he was just being responsible, but the truth settled in slowly, like a creeping shadow. I had no money of my own. I had no way to leave if I wanted to. And every time I brought up the idea of going back to work, he dismissed it with a laugh. "Claire, you don't need to work. What could you possibly earn that would make a difference?" The words stung, but I swallowed my pride. I had trusted him. I had chosen this life, but trust turned to humiliation the day he came home, looked me in the eye, and told me he was leaving me. Just like that. No warning, no discussion. "There's someone else," he admitted casually, as if he were discussing a change in the weather. "This isn't working for me anymore." He left me with nothing. No savings, no income, not even the means to pay for my own rent. Just a cold, empty apartment filled with memories of a life that had never truly been mine. For the first few weeks, I was numb. Then I was angry. And after that, I was determined. I wouldn't let this be my story. I refused to be the woman who lost everything because she trusted the wrong man. So I picked myself up, brushed off the humiliation, and started from scratch. At first, finding a job was nearly impossible. My resume had a massive gap, and every interview ended in rejection. "You've been out of the workforce for too long," they'd say. "We're looking for someone with more recent experience." But then I remembered Samuel. Years ago, he had offered me a position at his firm. At the time, I turned it down because I was about to marry Richard. Now, I had nothing to lose. Swallowing my pride, I reached out. To my surprise, he remembered me. More than that, he believed in me. "I'll start you as an intern," he said. "Prove yourself and we'll see where it goes." And so I worked. Harder than I ever had before. I studied late into the night, took on projects beyond my role, and did everything I could to prove that I belonged. 6 months later, I was no longer an intern. I had climbed my way into a leadership role at a consulting firm that specialized in rescuing struggling businesses. That was when fate decided to throw me one final, delicious twist. One morning, as I reviewed our new client list, a familiar name caught my eye. Richard Wallace. His company was on the verge of collapse. Clients had pulled out, contracts had fallen through, and he was desperate for help. I barely contained my laughter as I read through the details. The man who had once told me I was nothing without him was now at my mercy. And when he walked into that conference room and saw me sitting at the head of the table, his face drained of color. "Please, have a seat, Mr. Wallace," I said smoothly, locking eyes with him. For the first time, Richard wasn't the one in control. And I intended to make him feel every ounce of the power he had stolen from me. Richard swallowed hard, his usual arrogance replaced by something I had never seen before: uncertainty. He hesitated for a moment, as if debating whether to sit or bolt for the door. I tilted my head slightly, waiting, enjoying the moment. Finally, he lowered himself into the chair across from me, his movements stiff, measured. He started, then stopped. He cleared his throat, composing himself. "Claire, I didn't know you worked here." I let the silence stretch between us, watching him squirm. Gone was the self-assured man who had once laughed in my face when I told him I wanted to work again. The same man who had thrown me aside as if I were nothing more than a worn-out accessory. Now he was just another client, another failing businessman desperate for a lifeline. He shifted uncomfortably under my gaze, and I smiled, leaning back in my chair. "And yet here you are," I said smoothly, flipping through the documents in front of me. "Requesting help," Richard exhaled sharply, his jaw tightening. "Look, Claire, I know this is awkward, but my company is in trouble. I wouldn't be here if it weren't serious." Oh, I knew it was serious. I had already read the reports. His company was hemorrhaging money. His biggest clients had walked away, and his once loyal employees had been abandoning ship. He had gone from a confident, self-made businessman to a man standing at the edge of a cliff, begging for someone to pull him back. And that someone was me. I glanced down at the financial reports again, pretending to skim through them. I already knew my answer, but I wanted to watch him sweat a little longer. I traced a finger along the margins of the paper, my thoughts racing. I could help him. I had the knowledge, the experience, and the resources to turn his company around. But why should I? Why should I offer him a second chance when he never gave me one? I looked up, meeting his eyes. "I'll be honest with you, Richard," I said, keeping my voice calm, professional. "Our firm only works with businesses we believe have long-term potential. We don't waste resources on lost causes." His face hardened, his pride flickering back to life for just a second. "A lost cause?" he echoed, a hint of his former arrogance bleeding through. "I built this company from nothing. And now it's crumbling," I said bluntly, watching the color rise in his face. "Your financials are a disaster. Your reputation? Worse. You've lost nearly every major client. Why do you think that is?" He opened his mouth, then shut it. For the first time I saw it, the realization creeping into his expression. The truth was undeniable, and it was written all over his face. Richard Wallace was no longer the man in charge. I closed the file with a soft snap and folded my hands on the table. "I'll discuss your case with my team," I said coolly. "But don't get your hopes up." His eyes darted to mine, searching as if trying to figure out whether I was serious. "Claire, please," he said, his voice quieter now. "Just consider it. I need this." I wanted to laugh. The same man who once told me I was nothing without him. Now he was the one begging. I stood, smoothing out my skirt, letting the power shift settle between us. "I'll be in touch, Richard," I said simply, then turned and walked away, leaving him sitting there, alone with his failure. And for the first time in years, I felt like I had truly won. As I walked out of the conference room, my heels clicking against the polished floor, a flood of emotions surged through me: satisfaction, vindication, and something I hadn't expected, a small, lingering bitterness. I had dreamt about this moment. Seeing Richard brought to his knees, desperate and powerless, was something I had fantasized about during those dark months when I was struggling just to survive. And yet, now that it was happening, there was a hollowness to it. He wasn't the untouchable man he once was. He was just pathetic. Back at my office, I stared at his file, my fingers drumming against my desk. Logically, I knew what I should do: reject his case, let his business collapse, and move on with my life. But a part of me hesitated, not because I felt sympathy, but because I wanted him to truly understand, to feel the weight of what he had done to me. A simple rejection would let him off too easy. A knock at my door snapped me out of my thoughts. Samuel leaned against the frame, arms crossed. "So that was interesting." I raised an eyebrow. "You were eavesdropping?" "I don't have to. The tension in that room was thick enough to cut with a knife." He walked in, dropping into the chair across from me. "You gonna help him?" I scoffed. "Why would I?" He shrugged. "Because you're not a vindictive person, Claire. And because maybe, just maybe, you'd enjoy watching him squirm a little longer." I sighed, leaning back. "I don't know. Part of me wants to watch him fall apart. But another part." I hesitated, choosing my words carefully. "Another part wants him to realize just how wrong he was about me, and the best way to do that. Let him see me succeed in the place he tried to keep me out of," Samuel smirked, "then make him work for it." And that was when the idea formed. Rejecting Richard outright wouldn't be enough. I needed to make him understand, to feel every ounce of humiliation I had felt when he left me with nothing. The next morning, I sent him an email. "Mr. Wallace, after careful consideration, we have decided to proceed with an initial assessment of your company's needs. However, given your current financial instability, we will require a 3-month trial period before entering into a long-term agreement. You will report directly to me during this time. Failure to comply with our requirements will result in immediate termination of our services. Sincerely, Claire Thompson, Director of Crisis Management." I hit send and sat back, imagining the look on his face when he read it. If he wanted my help, he would have to swallow his pride and accept that I was the one in charge now. And the best part? He had no other choice. The reply came sooner than I expected. "Claire, I appreciate the opportunity. I'll do whatever it takes to turn things around. Let me know when we can start. Richard Wallace Short. Professional." But I could read between the lines. This was a man who had been backed into a corner. The Richard I knew would never have written something like this unless he was truly desperate. He hadn't even tried to negotiate. That told me everything I needed to know. I forwarded the email to my assistant with a brief instruction to schedule our first meeting. And just like that, Richard Wallace became my subordinate. The power shift was intoxicating. The first meeting was even better than I had imagined. Richard walked into the conference room at exactly 9 a.m., dressed in his usual designer suit. But there was something different in his posture, a stiffness, a hesitancy. Gone was the self-assured man who once dismissed me with a smirk. I sat at the head of the table, my team seated around me, ready to dissect his company's problems. Richard took the only available seat, one position slightly off-center, not quite in control of the room. It was a subtle reminder of who held the power now. I let my team lead the discussion at first, watching as Richard struggled to keep up. He wasn't used to being on the receiving end of tough questions, and it showed. Every time someone pointed out a flaw in his business strategy, I saw his jaw tighten, his fingers twitch against the table. He hated this. He hated being questioned, being picked apart, Dot. But the best moment came when he tried to defend himself. This downturn wasn't entirely my fault, he said, his voice a little too sharp. We lost a few key clients, but it's nothing we can't recover from with the right. I leaned forward, cutting him off with nothing more than a slight tilt of my head. A few, I repeated, flipping open the file in front of me. You've lost over 60% of your client base in the last 8 months. Your revenue has dropped by nearly half. Your employees are jumping ship because they don't trust your leadership. This isn't a few bad months, Richard. This is a full-blown crisis. The room went silent. My team exchanged glances, waiting for his response. Richard's eyes flickered toward mine, something unreadable in his gaze. For the first time, he looked truly shaken. I let the silence stretch, giving him a taste of the helplessness I had once felt. Then I closed the folder with a quiet, deliberate snap. This is what happens when you underestimate the people around you, I said coolly. When you refuse to adapt. If you want our help, you're going to have to do things my way. Understood? He exhaled slowly, then gave a tight nod. Understood. And just like that, the man who once controlled my life had been reduced to following my orders. I had won, Dot, but something told me this game wasn't over yet. Dot, the next few weeks were a slow, calculated dismantling of the man Richard used to be. I didn't make it easy for him. Every report had to be approved by me. Every strategy he proposed was questioned, dissected, often rejected outright. I treated him the way he had once treated me, like someone whose judgment couldn't be trusted. I made him rewrite proposals, redo financial projections, sit through endless meetings where my team pointed out his failures one by one. Dot. He endured it all without complaint, but I could see it eating away at him. The stiffness in his posture, the way he clenched his jaw whenever I dismissed one of his ideas. He was trying to hold on to whatever scraps of dignity he had left. Dot. But dignity wouldn't save him. Dot, one evening, as I was reviewing our latest assessment of his company, I noticed something interesting in the financial reports. A series of unusual withdrawals, small enough not to be obvious but consistent. Thousands of dollars slowly funneled out of the company over the last year. I frowned, leaning closer to the screen. Was this mismanagement? Or something worse? The next morning I called Richard into my office. Dot. He arrived looking more exhausted than usual. His usual sharp appearance was slipping, his tie slightly loosened, dark circles under his eyes. He had always been so meticulous about his image, but now the cracks were beginning to show. I gestured to the chair across from me. Sit. He hesitated, as if sensing something was wrong, but obeyed. I turned my screen toward him. Care to explain this? His eyes scanned the numbers, his expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he exhaled a small, bitter laugh and shook his head. Of course you'd find it. I arched an eyebrow. That's not an explanation. He leaned back, rubbing a hand over his face. It's not what you think. I think you've been siphoning money from your own company. My voice was calm, but inside, I was bracing myself for whatever excuse he was about to give. It wasn't for me, he said, his voice quieter now. I studied him. Then who was it for? He hesitated, then finally looked me in the eye. Her. For a second, I wasn't sure I had heard him correctly. Her. He gave a bitter smile. The woman I left you for. My stomach twisted, but I didn't let it show. Go on. He let out a slow breath, like a man admitting something he had been trying to bury. I thought she was everything I wanted. Young, beautiful, someone who didn't question me, but she bled me dry. Shopping sprees, vacations, gifts. She always needed more. I kept telling myself I could afford it, that it was worth it. But when the company started struggling, I had to keep up appearances. I couldn't let anyone see how bad things were getting. He let out a humorless laugh. So I used company funds. Just a little at first. Then more. I sat back, letting the weight of his confession settle over me. The irony was too rich. The man who once told me I was nothing without him had thrown his entire life away for another woman. Where is she now? I asked. Dot. His jaw tightened. Gone. I almost laughed. Of course she is. Richard didn't argue. He just sat there, shoulders slumped, the fight drained out of him. And for the first time, I saw him for what he really was. Not the powerful, untouchable man I once feared. Just another fool who had been played Dot. And yet, I felt no sympathy. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the desk. Here's what's going to happen, I said, my voice calm, measured. You're going to return every penny you took from the company. You're going to fix this mess. And if you so much as try to lie to me again, I will personally make sure you never work in this industry again. His throat bobbed as he swallowed. Understood. I nodded, satisfied. Good. Now get out of my office. He stood, hesitated for just a moment, then left without another word. I exhaled slowly, staring at the door long after it closed behind him. Richard Wallace had finally hit rock bottom. And for the first time, I wasn't the one beneath him. The weeks that followed were a blur of work and steady progress. Richard's company, once a floundering mess, slowly started to stabilize under my careful management. But as the days passed, I found myself questioning just how far I was willing to go to truly destroy him. The bitterness that had once consumed me, those long nights spent wondering how I could take back control, was now fading. I had done it. I had brought him down. And yet, it didn't feel like enough. Richard's requests for meetings had become more frequent. Each time I saw the same desperate look in his eyes. But now there was something else. Respect. He wasn't the man who had once scoffed at my potential, who had belittled me at every turn. Now, he was a man who had been humbled, brought low by his own arrogance. And though part of me reveled in this, I also started to realize something else. It was no longer just about revenge. It had become about proving to myself that I wasn't the naive woman I had once been. One evening, as I was reviewing some final reports before heading home, I received a text message. Richard, I need to see you. It's important. I hesitated, fingers hovering over my phone. For a moment, I considered ignoring it. After all, I had no obligation to help him anymore. But then I remembered the tangled mess of emotions that had once bound us together, the promises he had made, the way he had convinced me that I was incapable of anything without him. I sighed, sending a quick reply. Meet me tomorrow at 10 a.m. in the conference room. When Richard walked in the next morning, he looked different. His usual sharp suit was now a bit wrinkled, his expression drawn, as though he hadn't slept in days. His eyes were sunken, and the arrogance that had once radiated from him was replaced by a quiet desperation. I stood as he entered, offering a slight nod before gesturing to the chair across from me. He sank into it without a word, his hands clasped tightly in his lap. I waited for him to speak first. After a long pause, he cleared his throat. Claire, I know I don't deserve any sympathy, but I'm asking for help. I raised an eyebrow. Help. Not for me, he said quickly. For the company. I've lost everything. Clients, my reputation, even the few people I trusted are bailing on me. I'm asking for your advice, your guidance. If you really care about what happens to this business, then help me fix it. His words hit me harder than I expected. There was no anger, no deflection, just the raw honesty of a man who had finally come to terms with his own failures. But even as I felt a flicker of empathy, I couldn't ignore the path that had led us here. The years of manipulation, the way he had crushed my independence, the way he had abandoned me for another woman. I leaned forward, staring him down. You had your chance, Richard. You had every opportunity to treat me as an equal, to work with me, not control me. You chose the easy route. And now you want me to clean up your mess? You can't have it both ways. His jaw tightened, but he didn't argue. I know. I'm not asking for forgiveness, Claire. I'm asking for a chance to rebuild, because I can't do it without you. I sat back in my chair, considering his words. The part of me that had been hurt, betrayed, the part that wanted nothing more than to watch him fall, whispered that this was the final opportunity to push him even further down, to make him truly suffer. But another part of me, the part that had clawed my way back from nothing, saw something different. Richard wasn't the man I once loved. He wasn't the man who had made me feel small and insignificant. He was a man broken by his own choices, lost and alone. I had already won. I let the silence linger, watching him carefully. Finally, I sighed, leaning forward. I'll help you, I said, my voice steady. But understand this, Richard. This is your last chance. If you fail again, I won't give you another opportunity. His face softened just a little, as if he had been bracing for rejection. Thank you. I nodded. Don't thank me yet. We have a lot of work to do. He didn't leave immediately. He lingered for a moment, staring at me with something akin to gratitude and shame before rising to his feet. He paused just before walking out. Claire, I'll never forget how you've handled all of this. You were right all along. I didn't respond. I didn't need to. His acknowledgement was all I needed. When the door clicked shut behind him, I allowed myself to lean back in my chair and close my eyes for a moment. The journey hadn't been easy. It hadn't been quick. But I had rebuilt my life, brick by brick, until I was stronger than I had ever been. And now, Richard was learning what I had already known, that sometimes the people who try to control us are the ones who need saving, and it was up to us to decide whether we were going to be their saviors or their downfall. But as I sat there, a small part of me wondered, would helping him now only feed into the cycle? Would I become complicit in his redemption, knowing what he had done? I didn't have the answer, but for the first time in a long while, I didn't feel the need to. My path forward was clear, and that was all that mattered. The weeks that followed were a careful balance of progress and tension. Richard's company started to show signs of recovery under my guidance, but there was something different about the way I approached the situation now. I wasn't doing it for him. I wasn't doing it for some kind of vindication. I was doing it for me. I was doing it because I wanted to prove to myself, once and for all, that I had control over my own life, that I had the strength to make the right decisions, no matter how complicated or painful they might be. At times, it felt like a game, one that I knew I would win, but with the stakes higher than ever before. Richard continued to come to me for advice, and though I never showed him the satisfaction I felt, I could see the toll it was taking on him. The man who had once exuded confidence was now weary, defeated. He was fighting for his business, fighting for what little he had left. But I knew that no matter how hard he tried, he would never get back the one thing he had truly lost. Me. Still, There were moments when I found myself questioning my motivations. Was I truly helping him because I thought it was the right thing to do? Or was I just enjoying watching him squirm under my control? Every time I offered advice, or helped him navigate a tough decision, I wondered if I was doing it out of some lingering desire for retribution, or if I was simply trying to prove I was better than the woman he had once treated so cruelly. I tried not to think about it too much, focusing instead on the work at hand. And for the most part, I succeeded. We made progress. His company slowly recovered, and with each victory I found myself growing more confident in my abilities, more determined to continue building something of my own. But then, one evening, as I was leaving the office after another long day, I received an unexpected call. It was Samuel. "Claire," he said, his voice sounding distant, almost hesitant. "I need to talk to you about something." I paused, leaning against the doorframe of my office. "What's going on?" "I'm not sure how to say this, but I think you need to know something about Richard." I felt a chill run down my spine. "What do you mean?" There was a long pause before Samuel spoke again. "I've been hearing things, rumors, about the real reason Richard's company started to fail. It's not just about bad business decisions or a market downturn. There's something else." I straightened up, suddenly alert. "What are you saying?" "I don't have all the details yet," he continued, his tone grave. "But it sounds like Richard's been involved in something much more serious than just financial mismanagement. Something that could destroy him completely." I didn't speak for a moment, processing what he had just said. Richard had always been ruthless in business, but I had never thought he would cross certain lines. "What kind of something are you talking about?" I asked. "I don't know, but I think you need to dig deeper. If you really want to understand why things fell apart for him, you need to look at everything, especially the things he's trying to hide." I felt my stomach twist. "You're telling me this now?" "I know. I didn't want to drag you back into his mess. But now that I've heard enough, I think you should know. You've already invested so much in helping him. You deserve the truth." I hung up the phone without another word. My mind was racing. Richard had always been secretive, but now I had to wonder, had I been helping him not out of goodwill, but because he had manipulated me once again? This time, with a new kind of story. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I dug into Richard's business dealings. I called in favors, reached out to contacts I had made since my return to the industry, and started pulling together the pieces of a puzzle I had never even considered. The more I uncovered, the darker the picture became. There were shady financial dealings, secret contracts with companies that had ties to illegal activities, and rumors of insider trading. It seemed that Richard's downfall wasn't just the result of bad decisions. He had been playing with fire for a long time. And now, it was burning him. The revelation was unsettling, but it wasn't enough to stop me from continuing my work with his company. In fact, it only made me more determined. But I knew that this information could be the key to unlocking everything. If I exposed the truth about what he had been doing, it would end his career once and for all. I could ruin him completely, or I could give him a chance to rebuild on his own terms, without the weight of his secrets hanging over him. The choice gnawed at me. A week later, I called Richard into my office again. This time, I wasn't looking for answers. This time, I was the one holding the power. As he walked into the room, he looked even worse than before. His eyes bloodshot, his face gaunt, the stress of the past few months etched into his features. But he still carried himself like a man who thought he could convince me, charm me, to help him one more time. "Claire," he began, but I cut him off. "Sit down," I said, my voice cold. He obeyed, looking wary. I studied him for a moment, letting the silence settle between us before speaking. "I know about the fraud, Richard, about the companies, the illegal dealings, everything." His face went pale, and for the first time, I saw real fear in his eyes. What are you talking about?" I leaned forward, my eyes never leaving his. "Don't lie to me. I know what you've done." His mouth opened, but no words came out. "You've been using your company to cover up your mistakes, haven't you?" I asked, my voice low, deliberate. You've been taking money from clients who trusted you, making deals with people who could destroy everything you built. And now you want me to fix it. But I'm not going to help you this time, Richard. Not unless you come clean. Not unless you face the consequences of your actions. He sat there, his hands shaking. I could see the weight of his guilt crushing him, but it wasn't enough to earn my sympathy. "Please," he whispered, his voice hoarse. "Don't do this to me." I stood, walking to the window and looking out over the city. "I'm not doing this to you, Richard. You did this to yourself. And now, you need to take responsibility for it. If you don't, I'll expose everything. I'll make sure you never work again." I turned back to face him. His eyes were filled with panic now. But there was also something else. A flicker of recognition. "I've already won," I said quietly. "And you've already lost." Richard didn't answer. He just sat there, defeated. For the first time in my life, I felt completely free. The days after that meeting passed in a blur. Richard didn't speak to me again, at least not directly. He continued to come to work, but it was clear that the man I had once known, the man who had made me feel small and insignificant, was no longer the same person. There was a deep, unsettling quiet about him now, as if he was waiting for the inevitable to happen. But the truth was, I wasn't sure what I was going to do. I held all the cards now. I could destroy him, expose him for all his wrongdoing. Or I could give him a chance to redeem himself, to come clean and try to rebuild his life from the ashes. The power was mine to wield. And as much as I had craved it, I now found myself questioning what it really meant. I spent the next few days wrestling with my decision. Part of me wanted to watch him burn. After everything he had put me through, the years of control, the betrayal, the abandonment, he deserved to suffer. He deserved to lose everything. And yet something about that felt empty now. I had fought so hard to get here, to reclaim my independence, my strength. I had built something new, something of my own. Why should I give that up just to bring him down further? As I sat at my desk one evening, staring at the reports from his company, I made a choice. I wasn't going to destroy him, but I wasn't going to let him off the hook either. I would give him a chance to rebuild, but only on my terms. Only if he came to terms with his past actions, with the way he had treated me and so many others. The next morning, I called him into my office again. He entered cautiously, his eyes darting around as if he were expecting another bombshell. The tension between us was palpable, but I had no intention of making it more difficult than it had to be. I had already made my decision. "Sit down, Richard," I said, my voice calm but firm. He complied, his shoulders sagging under the weight of his own guilt. "I've thought a lot about our last conversation," I began, my fingers tapping lightly on the table. "And I've come to a conclusion. I'm not going to expose you. I'm not going to ruin you. But you need to come clean. Not just to me, but to everyone. You need to own up to what you've done, to the mistakes you've made, and to the people you've hurt." Richard's head snapped up at my words, disbelief flashing across his face. "You're giving me a chance." I nodded, meeting his gaze directly. "But it's not a free pass. If you want to rebuild your company, if you want to regain any semblance of respect, you need to take responsibility for your actions. You need to make amends where you can, and you need to prove that you can be a better man than the one I knew." He sat there in stunned silence for a moment, processing what I had said. And then, as if a weight had been lifted from him, he seemed to relax. Just a little. "I don't know if I can fix everything," he said quietly, his voice shaky. "But I'll try. I swear I'll try." I stood up from my desk, walking over to the window. The city sprawled out beneath me, its endless possibilities laid before me. For a long moment I simply stared, my mind racing. "You don't owe me anything, Richard," I said, my voice softening. "But if you want to save your company, if you want to rebuild, You need to do the hard work, not just with the business, but with yourself." He nodded, his eyes filled with a mixture of relief and determination. "I understand." I turned to face him, the weight of the decision I had just made settling in. This was the moment. This was where everything could change, for both of us. Good. But remember this, Richard. I won't be here to save you if you fail again. This is your last chance." He stood, his posture straighter than it had been in months, as if a part of him was finally ready to fight. "I won't let you down. I promise." And with that, he left the room. For the first time in what felt like forever, I breathed a sigh of relief. The weight that had been pressing on my chest for so long, my desire for vengeance, my need to prove I was more than the woman Richard had once dismissed, finally began to lift. In that moment, I realized that I didn't need to destroy him to find peace. I just needed to take control of my own life, to build something real, something that was mine, and mine alone. But as I turned back to my desk, a thought lingered in the back of my mind. Had I made the right decision? Was giving Richard a chance to rebuild his life a mistake? Or had I just given him the opportunity to become the man he should have been all along? I didn't know the answer. But for the first time in years, I wasn't afraid of finding out. The path ahead of me was still unclear, but it was mine to walk. And no one, least of all Richard, could take that away from me. As the days went on, Richard seemed to take my words to heart. He started to clean up the mess he had made, both in his business and in his personal life. Slowly the company began to recover, and with it his reputation. But it was clear that things had changed. He was no longer the arrogant, controlling man he had been when I first met him. And yet, there was something inside me that couldn't fully let go of the past. I had forgiven him, yes, but I would never forget. What we had lost, was something that couldn't be undone. And in that quiet, peaceful realization, I finally understood the truth. The greatest victory wasn't in bringing him down. It was in learning to stand tall on my own, to build something that was entirely mine. I had learned the hardest lesson of all, that true freedom comes not from revenge, but from the power to walk away and never look back. And that, in the end, was more than enough. By the time the final chapter of this saga unfolded, Claire had changed profoundly. What had started as a desire for revenge and a desperate quest for justice evolved into something far deeper. Her motivation had shifted from inflicting pain on Richard to reclaiming control over her own life. The power to shape her future was no longer tied to his failures or her past mistakes. Instead, she had found the strength within herself to move forward, leaving behind the chains of dependency and manipulation. Richard, on the other hand, was a mere shadow of the man he once was. The charismatic, confident businessman who had wielded power and authority over Claire and his employees was now reduced to a broken figure. He had lost everything that had once defined him: his wealth, his reputation, and the respect of those around him. It wasn't just his business that had crumbled, but the very foundation of his identity. He had made countless missteps along the way, and now they were catching up to him in the most devastating way possible. While Claire stood strong, empowered by her new independence, Richard was left to face the fallout of his own actions. His world was crumbling, and all that remained was the hollow sound of his own desperation. Claire wasn't alone in this moment of triumph. Samuel, the one person who had believed in her when no one else would, had become her ally throughout her journey. His support had been invaluable, and now, as Claire stood on the precipice of justice, Samuel was right by her side, silently witnessing the end of Richard's reign. The culmination of Claire's revenge came not through the explosive confrontation she had once imagined, but through careful, deliberate action. Her first move was subtle. She began to quietly leak information to the press, anonymously feeding them details about Richard's shady business practices and the financial irregularities within his company. At first, it seemed like a slow burn. But soon the cracks began to appear. Richard's empire started to falter as the media uncovered his manipulations and deceit. The turning point came when Richard, once so proud, was forced to stand in front of a public hearing, his reputation on the line, as he tried to explain away the mounting evidence. In a final, desperate bid to salvage his dignity, he attempted to charm the committee, to spin the situation in his favor. But it was too late. The public had already seen through his facade. His lies were exposed, and the damage was irreparable. Claire watched, her heart racing as Richard stumbled through the proceedings. He was humiliated in front of the very people who had once admired him. His former partners turned their backs. His investors demanded their money back, and the clients who had once flocked to his company now distanced themselves. As the proceedings concluded, Richard's business was seized by the government for financial mismanagement and fraud. His world, which had once seemed so unshakable, had come crashing down in a matter of weeks. For Claire, the feeling wasn't one of unrestrained joy. There was no satisfaction in watching him fall so hard. Instead, there was a quiet sense of closure. The anger and pain that had once consumed her slowly began to fade, replaced by the realization that she had regained what was rightfully hers. Richard had paid for his arrogance, and in doing so, Claire had found her own peace. In the days following Richard's public disgrace, the fallout continued. The media coverage was relentless, with every aspect of his failure dissected in detail. The scandal surrounding his company became a cautionary tale, a story of hubris and greed that served as a stark reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition. As for Claire, the path forward was clear. She had secured her place in the business world, not just through her own abilities, but by standing firm in her beliefs and not allowing herself to be defined by the mistakes of others. Samuel's support had been unwavering, and it was clear that he had become more than just a mentor. Their professional relationship had deepened, and as Claire moved forward, she found herself contemplating the possibility of something more. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in years, it felt like hers to shape. Richard, meanwhile, had been reduced to a mere shadow of the powerful figure he had once been. He tried to make amends, reaching out to old colleagues and friends in a desperate attempt to rebuild what he had lost. But the truth was, no one wanted to associate with a man whose name had been forever tarnished. His calls went unanswered, his attempts at reconciliation rejected. He was a man adrift without purpose, without the power he had once wielded so effortlessly. Claire's life, on the other hand, had taken a new direction. She had built something for herself that was based on her own hard work and determination. She was no longer the woman who had been controlled by Richard's manipulations. She had become her own person, a force to be reckoned with in her own right. As Claire sat in her office, reflecting on all that had transpired, she received an unexpected message. It was from Richard. His words were simple, almost pleading. "I was wrong, Claire. I see that now. I've lost everything. Can we talk?" Claire's eyes flicked to the window, watching the bustling city below. The world hadn't stopped turning because of Richard's downfall. She was still here, still moving forward. The message sat on her phone, a reminder of the past she had left behind. She typed a simple response, her fingers hovering over the keys for a moment before she pressed send. "It's too late, Richard. You had your chance." With that, she put the phone down, her gaze turning back to the horizon. The weight of the past was finally gone, and in its place, there was only the promise of a future that was all her own. For the first time, Claire truly understood the power of letting go. She had sought justice, and she had found it. But now it was time to move on, to leave the past behind, and embrace the life she had built for herself. And as the city lights twinkled below her, Claire smiled to herself, knowing that her journey was just beginning. She had fought for her freedom, and she had won. Sometimes, she whispered to herself, the best revenge is just living well.